Let's call it earth energy. The Chinese called it qi. The Japanese call it ki. It's a form of electromagnetic energy that the earth and the whole universe possesses. It's the source of life energy as far as I can see. Everything on this planet depends on that energy to exist. The source of that energy is the sun. Water somehow communicates it better. And because Iceland is a thermal nation full of thermal pools, the Icelanders are actually earthing every day because everybody's got thermal water in their houses. And in Japan, everybody knows that if you go to a thermal hot spring, an onsen, you're going to come back feeling like $1 million. They think it's because of the minerals in the water. I think it's because the water is grounded directly onto the earth. So you see, this information is actually totally revolutionary. It is so obvious. It is so simple. It's literally at our feet. That was a baptism. That was a blessing. And what happened after that unfolded as more and more peace and contentment and joy and happiness, despite, the physical hardships and the weather and the cold. I felt like the land was profoundly blessing me and helping me, which is totally paradoxical. It's the most extreme environment you can imagine. As the days unfolded, I was screaming, I was crying, I was laughing. Because nobody's around, you can really let it rip out there. So 65 years of suppressed anger and disappointment and joy and angst and beautiful memories came back. People would appear to me. I mean, it was like unfolding of visions. A journey like this is incredibly good for purging your soul of all of these very deep, cathartic emotions. Profound isolation has really amazing effects on human consciousness. Isolation is actually tremendously healthy and good for the human soul. Earthing or grounding is certainly not just about individual health. We are all earthling, and I make it singular. All 7 billion of us, if you gave us all one name, it would be, we are earthling. We are the residents of this planet. We live on it or we don't live at all. We live with it or we don't live at all. And we share the planet with millions and millions of other species who are all the same. They are also earthling. So it's not just humans. The trees are earthling, the cows are earthling, the horses are earthling, and the birds. So the first intimation that I was getting connected to more than just the land was the birds. I actually had birds walking on the road in front of me and along beside me to the left and the right. I had little birds walking along the road with me. One day I had an eagle fly about 100 feet over my head, and the next fly over, he was even lower. I could practically see his eyes. He was looking at me, no doubt about it. You're talking serious banishment here. This is not Napoleon and Elba. This is the surface of the moon. And if you can survive that, wow, you got some chutzpah, big time. I went in there, this overconfident guy, and Iceland broke me down bit by bit. And then Iceland, the spirit of Iceland, let's say, started to penetrate. And I started to learn from the environment about what it means to survive. Profound peace, profound peace. The peace that surpasseth all human understanding. The peace that we're actually made of. That's us. That's what we are. It's not some special addition later to human consciousness. That is the foundation of human consciousness, is peace. I could never have imagined that I would get peace in a place that was so wild, so changeable, so volcanic. In the middle of wildness is where you find peace. You begin to understand that the old people were really smart. Health and vitality and consciousness do not depend on an easy life at all. They come from somewhere entirely different. And we rigorously avoid going there with our shoes and our boots and our hiking gear and all of our stuff. It's like we're doing everything possible not to get connected with the mantra, I'm going to get connected. It's insanity. What did this all actually end up doing for me? What was the message? It was simply be kind, live kindly, behave kindly to other people. And that's what Iceland actually taught me. The wildest environment teaches you the kindest thing. It's stuck in my body. I came back with an Icelandic spirit in my body that will remind me every time I'm standing on the earth, what was that we told you? Remember? Be kind. Just as you're about to get on this guy's case here. Oh, and if I remember in time, then the journey will not have been in vain.
Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Truth, Health, Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alan Burton, and today my guest is John Craig. John Craig was born in Scotland and has lived multiple lives as an expat in Japan. He has been an entrepreneur in the East and the West and has written and translated over 40 books on new paradigm science, spirituality, travel, and ancient civilization, as well as translated works on consciousness, health, and ecology. As a documentary filmmaker, he has recently produced Why on Earth, about a barefoot walk across Iceland, as well as Earth Pilgrims, filmed in 6 different countries. He has interviewed dozens of individuals from both the East and the West and published their talks in Japanese. He has been a corporate advisor, adventure tour leader, disaster relief worker, interpreter, freelance journalist, lecturer, and television commentator in Japan. He has practiced Zen all his adult life and has a penchant for arcane mysticism, especially from the 13th century. He recently started his own podcast called Real Rover to explore why on earth we, as humans, have gotten so far off track in our relationship to our planet, to each other, and thus to ourselves. Real Rover focuses on the vital balances between the East and the West, the inner and the outer, the male and the female, the spiritual and the material. John introduced Earthling to Japan and has begun a substantial movement under the banner Earthling. And it's Earthling we are going to focus on in today's interview. In 2017, John embarked on a 633-kilometer barefoot coast-to-coast walk across Iceland to demonstrate the health benefits of earthing. This journey has been captured in John's forthcoming documentary, Why on Earth? And today, John is here to tell us all about his incredible journey. John Craig, Real Rover, welcome to the podcast. John, you do have a Japanese name as well, don't you? It's
a name I have in Japan, and I also have a Japanese name. My name in Japan is Ehan Deravi. I'm a writer there, and so I publish under that name. But these days, even a foreigner can have his name written in Chinese characters, which used to be impossible. So I actually have a Japanese rendition of John Craig, which is Kureigu John.
Beautiful. Great. But for today, I'm going to call you John, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
John, the Real Rover. And the reason why I'm interviewing you today is because I heard you had been walking barefoot, in fact, across Iceland from coast to coast. So that's why I'm here to ask you a little bit about that. So
thank you.
Why did you decide, first of all, to do a big barefoot walk? And why did you decide to go to Iceland?
Since 2013, I began to research this field called earthing or grounding. Specifically, I found a book called Earthing, co-authored by 3 gentlemen. The principal investigator's name is Clint Ober. Clint can be credited as the individual who brought this idea out. So I read the book, immediately became intrigued because of the robust evidence. Even though some would argue it's anecdotal, it's pretty robust when scores of people tell of their experience before and after connecting their bodies to the earth. So I began to practice it immediately to find out if it was true, because I like to experiment with ideas. And I found that, yes, there's definitely something to this that is not psychosomatic. It's not flaky in the least. In fact, it's really grounded. So years later, having introduced this to the Japanese, who must be the least grounded people in the world, I found that there are ways to get information out and there are ways to not get information out, if I could say that. Mm-hmm. Books and lectures and YouTube I vigorously used. However, unfortunately, we all have pigeonhole minds. And when we get new information, we look for the pigeonhole in our minds to slot it into and thus either discount it or on the other side, completely become enslaved by an idea. And so I realized that to get this idea out to people, I would have to do something rather unusual in order to demonstrate that it might be worthy of your attention. And so in the 5th year of activity in Japan, lecturing and writing and translating in connection with earthing, I had this insane idea of walking barefoot across the rock, Iceland. That was the genesis.
Wow. So you say that the Japanese are the least grounded people in the world. Is that because of urbanization? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I don't mean it in any derogatory sense. When we say that person's really grounded in normal English, we mean that that person is not scattered in their minds, that they are connected, that they're stable and sane. He's a really grounded guy. But we have to ask ourselves where the expression originally came from. Why would we use that expression to refer to such an individual? Mm-hmm. And Japan has so much electrical activity that you can see Shinjuku in Tokyo from the space shuttle. It became rather popular amongst astronauts as they flew over to go, oh, look, there's Shinjuku, because it is so clearly a center of electrical light activity. So Japan is an advanced nation, technologically very advanced. The density of cell phones, electrical equipment, computers, it's very, very dense, electrically speaking. And for those who don't know anything about the theory of earthing, we need to ground ourselves because of so much. To make it easy to understand, static electricity builds up in our bodies due to all of the electrical machinery around us. And this actually causes some rather serious imbalances and actually is related to a lot of our diseases. So because everything is covered in asphalt now in Japan, because everybody is working inside of office buildings or insulated homes, and in fact, the average Japanese house doesn't have a ground where their plugs go in, it really means that they are the most ungrounded country, wow, I think, on Earth.
So these earthing devices that we can buy, which can plug into our plug sockets, and they plug into the ground pin. So yeah, they don't even have a ground pin in their sockets.
Yeah, we had a great deal of difficulty because I actually didn't just bring the idea into Japan. With my partner's help, I actually wondered how I was going to get American-made earthing sheets and mats into the country if we didn't have any place to plug them in. So we had a lot of work to do in order to find ways that we could help them to find some earth in some ground in their homes. So yes, it was a great challenge compared to any other country.
But did you solve that challenge?
Yes.
You did.
And now more and more people are sleeping grounded thanks to that. But I do believe that the simplest and best way to ground your body is to take your shoes and socks off and stand on the earth. Absolutely. That's always the natural way it has been. And by that, I don't mean to say that it's inferior. Electrically speaking, it is exactly the same effect. Plugging into a ground in your house, plug hole, and standing on earth, because we test people with voltmeters. It's the same. However, there's something about a direct contact with natural ground that makes a difference, and that takes us back to Iceland. There was a huge difference in the grounding effect of Iceland than that with a sheet or in Japan.
Okay, so this adventure in Iceland, you were kind enough to send me a little preview of the film. So I watched maybe half of the film today, and inspired by what you had told me 2 nights ago when we first talked, I decided to take my laptop outside and I put it on a crate, and I was sat on the grass connected to the earth.
Wonderful.
And so I haven't seen how the journey in Iceland began, but when did you arrive and what was the plan when you got there?
Well, why Iceland of any place? For me, Iceland is like the earth used to be. Although I can't say how the earth used to be, I can imagine what the earth was like before we humans really started to seriously trash it. And having been a world traveler all of my life, I've had lots of opportunities to be in places like the Amazon jungle, in the Andes, in the desert, where you still have relatively unpolluted places. But Iceland is something different. First of all, geologically, it's just about the newest place on the planet. It erupted from the sea floor. You know, we're talking only millions of years, not hundreds of millions or billions of years. So it is almost a brand spanking new island. And so the energy one finds there in the environment is rather unique. It's very unpolluted because there's a tiny population for its size, and it's volcanic. So it is still emerging as an environment. Volcanoes are going off all the time, micro earthquakes. It's thermally powered by this energy. So it's kind of a logical choice if you want to prove the theory that earthing or grounding makes you stronger and healthier, then that would be the place. It's also, I think, very beautiful environment. So I decided that that would be the place, and I would make a film and document if I could survive the journey and actually prosper using grounding as a way to keep myself healthy, then it would be a document. It would really, that's why we call them documentary films. It would be a document that strongly suggests to people that if you do the same, you'll get really healthy too, and you'll be able to accomplish things that your body normally wouldn't even consider. So I did several journeys to research the idea, starting in 2012, actually. I first went there to report on the so-called Krepa, which means the huge financial crisis that the Lehman shock initiated in 2008. There was a documentary called Inside Job that actually won an Oscar. It was the best documentary ever, clearly showing us how this economic debacle happened. It was a setup. It was an inside job. It was a few guys on Wall Street and their buddies crashing the planet. And because Iceland is such an insular, in a sense, small population, they got hit instantaneously. Their entire standard of living, they were like in the top 2, 3 wealthiest, most respected nations on the planet. They had one of the best living standards anywhere on earth. They were a wealthy, modern democracy one day, and the next day they were reduced to tatters. I kid you not. These people really went through the ringer, and it didn't trickle down like in other countries. It was like, today you've got a mortgage for, let's say, £1,000, and your house is worth 500,000. Tomorrow, your house is worth £200,000 and your mortgage is £2,000 because the local currency crashed and everything was turned upside down. Not because of anything the people had done, but because they were hijacked by, the banksters and the politicians. So I went there as a journalist, as a freelance journalist, to find out how they had handled this thing. And I realized that the Icelandic people themselves are very special, but I didn't really quite connect to the land yet. But that gave me a connection in Iceland with one particular individual. And that one particular individual was responsible for the so-called pots and pans revolution in large part. So then 2 or 3 more exploratory journeys once the idea came. Can I get staff to help me to do this? What's the route going to be? Is this even feasible? And after 3 research journeys, I started last June on the 23rd to begin a walk that would end up being 633 kilometers, and it would take me 33 days. So that's really how it unfolded, Alan.
So I was thinking beforehand, I didn't know anything. I don't say anything, but I didn't know much about Iceland. So I was thinking, what kind of temperatures would there be? You had to look into the feasibility. I saw from the film, certainly in the second half, it seemed to be spring. Flowers were coming through the earth and starting to bloom. So what kind of temperatures are we talking for your bare feet here?
The last exploratory, or let's say preparatory visit, was in May 2017, and it was still snowing. The road I was going to take through the highlands of Iceland, I went with my film crew to check out, and there was a big, it was blocked by a huge sign in 2 languages in Icelandic, which I can't pronounce, but it said "Ofaert," something like that, "Ofaert," and below that in English it said "impassable." And I thought that was kind of hilarious. So the road I'm going on is impassable. And my Icelandic brothers said to me, this road is open 2, maybe 3 months a year, right? The road through the highlands is open 2, maybe 3 months a year. Sometimes it opens in June, and it usually is finished by Iceland. So that gives you a hint. It is completely impossible to go in there because of snow, horrendous winds, terrible weather. And as the temperature, even though I was there for the solstice, typical day I'd wake up and it'd be 2 or 3 degrees centigrade. And if it got up to 7, it was a really good day. And at night, of course, it's hovering around freezing outside the tent. So summer there is a very brief situation, and it can snow even in July. So I was warned by my Icelandic staff. In fact, they said, you have no idea what you're doing. You are absolutely out of your mind.
So you just jumped right in. And the best way to learn is to do and to experience. You jumped straight in. You started this walk. You chose that window of opportunity that was most likely to be going to allow you to pass through the highlands.
Yeah.
How did you feel at the start, could you instantly on day one, day two, could you feel a difference? You'd expected a difference in that part of the world. Could you feel a difference in your body, in your heart, in your mind?
Well, I'm because I'm a writer, and I do a lot of communication in Japanese about the human journey, human history, human consciousness, human creativity. I like to have a very eclectic kind of look at things from many different angles. And, the ancient people all knew instinctively that human life is actually the monomyth, what we call the hero's journey. It actually is there in all of us from the start. A lot of us will refuse to go on that journey simply because it involves fairly testing situations, let's say. So I knew before I went that this journey was not just a physical journey. I knew before I left that it was much more an internal pilgrimage of the spirit, of the soul. And because of that, I knew that there would be some serious challenges to come to me. I was expecting it. In a sense, I was looking forward to it because that's par for the course. So I set out very optimistic, really, wow, finally it's happening. I'm walking from Tingvellir, which Tingvellir is the place where democracy began 1,000 years ago. That's where the Vikings got together from all over the country, and they started hammering out their basic system of, we're all going to get together, we're going to fight if we have to and argue, we're going to party, but we're going to set our ideas down here, some kind of what we would call government now. It was born in Iceland 1,000 years ago. So was Christianity. And so the place I started was where those two things happened. It's also where two tectonic plates meet, Alan. The two gigantic tectonic plates actually meet right there. And there's a huge crack in the earth, which you can see clearly. On one side is the Asian plate, and on the other side is the North American plate. And this goes right through Iceland. So Iceland itself is sitting on top of what's called a hotspot, where these two tectonic plates actually meet. So it was very symbolic too. On one side of the street was Asia. On the other side of the street was America and Europe, and I'm connected to both. So the journey began with rich symbolism. And so I left full of energy, and I'm on an asphalt road in the beginning, barefoot, of course. And the inspiration was all now in my body, and suddenly there was a reporter in front of me. Just pure synchronicity. This would happen the whole journey. They just stopped, and they happened to know my cameraman who was running behind me, and they did a U-turn and they interviewed me, and it was on the news that day. And I took that to mean, I have support for this journey. The Icelandic people will know what I'm doing right away. They might think I'm crazy, but at least they'll know. The first day, I got off the asphalt after about 13 kilometers, and finally, I got into the wilderness. I was able to leave my crew behind completely, and I was totally alone in this vast wilderness. And I got completely lost on the first day. Completely. Yeah. And in the beginning, I was kind of, oh, wow, it's okay. That's fine. I've got a radio telephone, but the radio telephone only works up to, what do we call them? A walkie-talkie. They're only good for 10-kilometer radius. And if there's mountains, you're stuck. I had received a GPS, quite an expensive unit. But when people explain things to you, this is how you use a computer or whatever, you're not really paying attention. Oh, yeah, I get it. But when you're out in the field and you're looking at this weird stuff on a tiny screen, I thought, nah, screw it. I know where I'm going. I didn't. I went south instead of going north for 3 hours in this vast wilderness of moss. And because it was moss, after asphalt, I was in heaven. It was like springy moss. You know, my feet felt fantastic. It's sunny. The birds are tweeting. There's nobody anywhere. And I'm kind of high. Now that's dangerous. When you get like that kind of high and you're feeling that good, you should start worrying. And after a while, I went, wait a minute. There's something wrong with this picture. I was going exactly in the wrong direction. So lesson number 1, don't ever think you know what you're doing. That's why you have a GPS. That's why you have maps. That's the other meaning of getting grounded. Don't get spaced out here and taken away by your euphoria, because it could kill you literally out here. So I turned around. So I lost 6 hours.
So did you figure out the GPS eventually in order for you to find out you were going the wrong way and turn around?
It was the GPS that alerted me. The direction of the arrow didn't look right. I took out my map, you know, and I have studied maps and all this stuff. But again, I was in a very, very altered state of consciousness, Alan. I wasn't thinking normally. You know, I'd spent over a year preparing for this. I was there. The sun was shining. I was barefoot on the Icelandic moss and feeling this enormous environmental hit in my body. It was ecstatic. I lost it. I lost my logical, rational mind. It should have been obvious I was going in the wrong direction.
Was the sun out, or was it cloudy?
No, the sun was out 24 hours a day because it doesn't set.
So you could have checked with the sun as well.
I should have checked with the sun. I should have checked. I mean, it's obvious. Like, what kind of an idiot would go south when he's supposed to be going north?
An idiot on a high.
Totally. I mean, very dangerous high. So thankfully, the sun didn't set. And around midnight, I finally found my support driver's Jeep and got my tent up. But that was lesson number 1. Don't think you know. So right from the start, I was getting these daily shocking kind of training sessions. You're not in Texas anymore. Was that what it was? You're not in. Yeah, you're not. Yeah, you're not there anymore.
So the next day, you must have been more grounded in both senses of the word.
The next day, I got grounded by torturous pain in my feet because the roads in Iceland, if you can call them that, are made of shredded volcanic lava, which is crushed and driven into the ground to make some kind of a road for jeeps. And as you know, as we all should know, lava is like diamond, hard. And I had foolishly assumed, I knew that was the case for some roads, but there is moss. And I had assumed there will always be somewhere off-road where you can walk on the moss or on the volcanic soil. But on day 2, there was nothing but wall-to-wall shredded lava surface. There was no escape. I had to walk on that barefoot. And if you can imagine stepping on something like that, even with toughened feet, and my feet were not tough, it's, you know, think of your weight on that. There is no escape from it. It's there. Every single step hurts. And, you know, I try and relax, and I do all of these internal machinations to pretend it's not happening. But 7 hours later, you can see in the film, I just keel over, and it's like, I can't do this. This will destroy my feet. I'd already got holes in my soles, and there was some punctures, and so I really had the big doubt on day 2. Like, I don't know if I can do this. I may have bitten off more than I can chew here.
So how did you go on?
Compromise. um, I had left what we call earthing tabi. Tabi in Japanese means what the old ninja used to wear on their feet. They're like what you were talking about, Vibram shoes, which have 5 different toe separators, let's call them. Well, the tabi are split into 2, so your big toe and the other 4 can fit in, and they were great for climbing and having really close to barefoot connection with the earth in the old days. And a company I discovered in Japan with, actually my partner discovered, made specifically for earthing kind of slippers that had carbon soles, which would be exactly the same as walking barefoot in terms of the conductive energy of the earth getting into you. And I had deliberately left them at the church that I left from in Thingvellir, because being an obstinate guy, I proclaimed, like with full egoic certainty, I will not put anything on my feet till I come back to this church a month and a half later or whatever. And I deliberately left them at the church. And there's actually a scene in the film where you can see me leaving them there. That was it. So even if my feet were going to start, there was no choice. I would have to keep going. That was how I pushed myself. But my crafty and pragmatic Icelandic brothers knew exactly what was going to happen, because they had seen those roads all their lives, and they knew no human could walk on those. Not impossible. So Gunnar, he slipped those shoes into the back of the Jeep, knowing that this would happen. And I discovered them at the end of day 2 and thought, oh, wow, I'll still be earthed. I can still walk barefoot as much as it's possible. But on the shredded lava, I will have to protect my feet or I will end up in a hospital. So that's called compromise. So it was like Iceland from the start was saying, you come in here with your big ego thinking you're going to overcome this. Well, it's actually going to be the other way around. You're going to have to get in line with this place. And so that means compromise. First thing you got to do is compromise. Get off your ego trip. And so from day 3, I had a pattern where I would wear the earthing slippers, the tabi. And by the way, tabi also means journey in Japanese. It's a double entendre. So I got hope. Oh, I can do it. So from day 3, things got a little bit better.
Wonderful, wonderful. So the journey progressed, because I was going to ask you about day 2, because from that second half of the film, I'd seen you referred to it as not funny. So that was one of my questions about day 2. But from there on, from day 3, you've learned your harsh lessons on day 1 and on day 2. How did things progress from there? And how was your body beginning to feel? And how was your mind beginning to feel as you progressed?
Very, very good question, Alan. So from day 3, I thought, oh, now it's going to be okay. I'll just go on and it'll be fine. Well, that's not how the monomyth works, remember?
No.
That's not how it works. So one other thing I learned, I actually learned it from a strange place, which is called general semantics. Alfred Korzybski had this idea that the map is not the territory, the words are not the reality, the language is not the reality. And so the map is not the territory is a phrase I've always used in my life, but the map really isn't the territory, because in Iceland, there are great changes because of weather and volcanic activity to the maps, and the maps are not accurate. So I had a fairly short day on day 4, I believe, or day 5, it seemed. And I thought, great, I'll walk for 6-7 hours, and there's this lovely little hut on the map I can stay at. Won't be a tent tonight. I'll just mosey up there. And of course, there's nobody around, and my driver had to go a long roundabout way to get to that hut. So I was not in touch with anybody, which I felt great about. And I get to the place on the map where it says I get on a mountain, and I go up the mountain and down the mountain to a hut. And there I find an enormous glacial lake on my left called Hagavatten. And if you look at Hagavatten, Vatten means lake, the actual Google picture shows you it's frozen over because it's right next to a glacier, and the glacier actually becomes the lake in winter. So it doesn't look like water on Google Maps. Hagavatten. So I get to Hagavatten. I'm walking along its edges, and Hagavatten then pours through an opening and becomes an instant waterfall, which goes a few hundred feet down to the valley, which then leads to where I'm going. But the problem is that when I get to that spot where the road is supposed to go straight, there's a gap between my side of the waterfall and the other side. And, oh, okay, stop. What do we do with this? How do you get across?
So how big's this gap? How wide? How deep?
No, when I saw on the film, it looked wider than I thought when I was there. I would estimate realistically maybe 8 feet, 9 feet, something like that. But the side I was on was higher than the other side. And, you know, right below, you've got a huge lake is emptying into a very violent waterfall. Imagine that. And but from a higher to a lower place, you think you can do it, right? Oh, I can jump. I'll take a big leap and I'll be over in 2 seconds, right? And so I was getting all ready for the jump. And, but then, you know, something counseled me, just take a breath here, you know, we'll just wait and see if the staff show up and if they've got a rope. If my driver, if I can get him on the walkie-talkie, get a rope. So, but I got impatient and I thought, screw it. So I picked up my backpack and I actually threw it across to the other side to make sure I would follow. Because if you've already thrown your bag over, you know, you got to go, right? It's like, commit. And just then, 2 Australian tourists, young guys, showed up. And they saw my bag on the other side and they saw me on the other side. And I said, would you mind just steadying me as I land? Because I was getting ready to jump. And you should have seen the look on this young guy's face. He just started walking backwards like, sorry, mate, can't help you there. Like, he was really worried. Like, I'm not going to be part of this. No, thank you. And then I thought, what? This guy doesn't believe I can do it? So that should have been a message. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just wait a bit longer. Finally, Gunnar, my good friend and director of the film, showed up, and he's a real tough Icelander, this guy. He knows the country inside out. He went up and down the area that I was considering jumping, and he just ordered me, forget it. You're not going to do that. Okay, well, what am I going to do? He said, you're going to swim across the lake. It's safer.
And what temperature is this lake?
Well, go figure. It's a glacial lake. It's, you know, on the other side, it's a glacier. So it's kind of nippy.
And how wide?
I was concerned more about the lake than the jump, because if you imagine your bathtub, when the water goes down the plug hole, what kind of a vortex that is.
Yeah. And
if you were a fly on the surface of that bathwater as it was getting lower, shallower, you'd get sucked right in. Well, I was really worried about that because when millions of gallons go through a tiny gap and become a waterfall, you've got a vortex under the surface. So I could have got across a fairly narrow area fairly quickly, but I might have got sucked in. So I was actually really more concerned about that than the jump, more concerned about that than the coldness. That wasn't worrying me. But I was concerned that I'd get halfway across and suddenly, whoops, I'm going in anyway. So quite honestly, I don't remember how long it took me to get across. It was several minutes probably. I don't remember the cold. I don't remember anything because I was so intensely focused. And that in itself was a lesson. It was like, when you're that focused, there just isn't any emotional stuff at all. You just do it. And that was the gateway. That was the gate. That was the guardian in the monomyth. That was Iceland saying to me, you either do this or you're going home. We're not going to let you in. We're not going to play with you. Because the highlands, I later realized, is sacred ground. It's really sacred ground. It's very, very special place. And they don't just let anybody in there. It was the feeling. So if you pay the price, we'll let you in, and then things are going to get really interesting, which is exactly what happened.
So what did happen? I mean, first thing I want to ask you, though, is this connection with water, because you mentioned in the film about the volcanic springs. Obviously, this was a cold lake, not a volcanic spring, but you were talking about the Earth connection via water. So the conductivity is even greater when it's coming through water, and you can feel the benefits even more. Were you able to feel that, having, obviously, while you were going across, you don't remember much because the focus was so intense and so single-minded, but once you got to the other side, could you feel that benefit of having been in the water?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I am a Christian, and it was a baptism. I later realized that was a baptism. And I realized why people have, in many other cultures, not just the Christian, they have always used water in sacred ceremonies. Because water is, first of all, the most miraculous form of matter that exists. It's the only form of matter which has three forms: solid, liquid, and gas. It actually has four. There's another form of water, which is called the fourth phase of water, and I'll be interviewing a guy talking about that, a scientist. But it can appear in three different ways, water. So there's something special about water. We all know we're made of water, 70% water. But water conducts. You got it. Water conducts. Let's call it earth energy. And there's nothing flaky about this at all. It's actually electrical. The Chinese called it qi. The Japanese call it ki. It's a form of electromagnetic energy that the earth and the whole universe possesses. It's the source of life energy as far as I can see. Everything on this planet depends on that energy to exist. That plus the sun. The source of that energy is the sun. So water somehow communicates it better. And because Iceland is a thermal nation full of thermal pools, the Icelanders are actually earthing every day. And in the film, I ask an Icelander, do you people actually know that you are being grounded every day because everybody's got thermal water in their houses? And he said, no, we don't know. So that was kind of, wow, they don't know that this is why they are so. And in Japan, everybody knows that if you go to a thermal hot spring, an onsen, you're going to come back feeling like $1 million. They think it's because of the minerals in the water. I think it's because the water is grounded directly onto the earth. So you see, this information, Alan, is actually totally revolutionary. It is so obvious. It is so simple. It's literally at our feet, and we don't know it. It's like missing out on the biggest piece of information because it's so obviously right here. We call it hiding in plain sight.
That's exactly the phrase I was thinking of as you said it.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
There it is. So, yes, that was a baptism. That was a blessing. And what happened after that unfolded as more and more peace and contentment and joy and happiness, despite, the physical hardships and the weather and the cold. That was nothing compared to what was going on inside of me, which was this, I felt like the land was profoundly blessing me and helping me, which is totally paradoxical. It's the most extreme environment you can imagine. The wind, they told me before I left, they said, when the wind starts, you'll know what we were talking about. But I was born in Scotland. We had a lot of wind. North Atlantic countries have a lot of wind. Britain has a lot of wind. So you learn the wind can also blow a lot of cobwebs out of your soul. And that's what it did for me.
Yes, that's something I wanted to ask you as well. I've written down what you said because I really liked what you said. The wind was marvelous. I was throwing memories away into the wind. Walk and throw. Scream in the wind. Shout and rage. So you were using the wind as a method of cleansing, of purging almost. Is that
Purging
right?
is a good word. Purging is a good word. I learned the importance of purging in the Amazon. I did quite a lot of work with Amazonian healers.
Mm-hmm.
And for them and any other healer around the world, they all agree. The first thing you got to do is purge. You got to get rid of stuff before you can actually get healed. It's much more about releasing than it is about getting. And so emotionally, as the days unfolded, I was screaming, I was crying, I was laughing. Because nobody's around, you can really let it rip out there. So, 65 years of suppressed anger and disappointment and joy and angst and beautiful memories came back. People would appear to me. I mean, it was like unfolding of visions. I could clearly feel people from my past coming there to visit me.
Dead
And I
or
would
alive?
feel, oh yeah, dead, of course.
Yeah.
I say, of course. No, there were some living people too. That's a good, careful point you made there. But especially people who had died, and the profound regret of knowing that I didn't pay enough attention to those people while they were alive. One good friend in particular, a great adventurer, at 69, had made an almost impossible sea voyage in a homemade dinghy, and they never found his body. His boat washed up on the shores of Washington weeks later, and he, I know that he knew he was going on his last journey. He was a great adventurous soul, and he didn't want to. I honestly believe he didn't want to get old and die. He wanted to go out in style. He was a warrior, and he came. And like, why didn't I spend more time with such a dear friend? All of this regret. And I'm sure we'll all get it when we die. Like, oh, I should have. And if I had only. So, a journey like this is incredibly good for purging your soul of all of these very deep, cathartic emotions. And because of Iceland's powerful environment, I was able to do that in private. And as the days passed and I purged more, new, let's not call it new energy, the actual already existent energy of my own soul became more apparent, let's say.
So that which is usually buried under all this angst and feeling that you would put a lid on all your life. So you take the lid off, let it out, and then you find your own soul underneath.
That's a very good way of expressing it. That's pretty much exactly how it happened. And many people will say, well, you don't have to do something extreme like that. Actually, I think you do. And if you look at the records of extreme adventure, of long distance solo journeys like sailors and mountain climbers, John C. Lilly, he was one of the scientists I interviewed very early on in my career. He's the guy who invented the isolation tank. He's the guy that the Day of the Dolphin movie and Altered States was made about. And he was the guy who showed that isolation, profound isolation, actually has really amazing effects on human consciousness. And I found out that isolation and privation like that is actually tremendously healthy and good for the human soul. And we can try messing about with that with seminars and ways and techniques and books, but it just scratches the surface. I think we owe it to ourselves all to go on a journey like that, which of course in the old days they called the Vision Quest. And you know, we've lost it.
So that's the value, the true value of solitude.
Yeah, the true value of solitude.
But
not a popular idea.
No, but you weren't completely alone, because there is a scene in the film which is actually on your birthday. It looks like, how old were you on that birthday?
65.
65. It looks like it's possibly the happiest birthday you have ever had.
Definitely.
You're there singing to the wee Icelandic horsey. And it's really, you could just feel the joy in the scene. It really comes across through the screen. And it did look like, yeah, you were really enjoying yourself. And as I say, you weren't completely alone, because you were connecting to the land, to the earth, to the plants, and on this occasion, to the horsey.
Well, that's an appropriate time, Alan, to talk about the fact that earthing or grounding is certainly not just about individual health. That's really limiting the idea. We are all earthling, and I make it singular. All 7 billion of us, if you gave us all one name, it would be, we are earthling. We are the residents of this planet. We live on it, or we don't live at all. We live with it, or we don't live at all. And we share the planet with millions and millions of other species who are all the same. They are also earthling. So it's not just humans. The trees are earthling, the cows are earthling, the horses are earthling, and the birds. So the first intimation that I was getting connected to more than just the land was the birds. I actually had birds walking on the road in front of me and along beside me, to the left and the right. I had little birds walking along the road with me. Now, my Icelandic brothers would make a total fool of me, and they say, you don't get it at all. Those particular birds are trying to distract you from their nests, which are off to your right and your left, which is possibly true. But one day I had an eagle. Fly about 100 feet over my head. And you try and go on the internet and find out how rare it is to see an eagle in the central highlands of Iceland. There's nothing for the eagle to eat. There are no trees. There are no rodents. There is nothing. So why would an eagle show up above my head in the middle of the Icelandic Icelands? Well, of course, you may say, yeah, you were beginning to lose your mind and imagine that eagle had come out just to meet you. Poor old man. But I shouted up to the eagle as he flew over my head, oh, you marvelous creature, look at your beautiful wings. You are gorgeous. Good morning. Thank you for showing up, right? This is what isolation does to you, maybe. And then he began to fly off. And I shouted after him, no, one more time, come back. Sure enough, the eagle did a U-turn. And the next flyover, he was even lower. I could practically see his eyes. He was looking at me, no doubt about it. So those kind of experiences expanded into communication with flowers, with birds. I was singing a song to the cows in Japanese on my birthday, apologizing for having eaten so many of them on my paleo diet, you know. And then that horse showed up. Well, actually, there were about 30 horses, wild horses. And the director, smart guy, said, you know, we can't just make a documentary about you walking. And he ordered me, he said, if you can sing to cows, you can sing to horses. Go and sing to them horses. So they're about 100 yards away, 20 horses nibbling away on the grass. And I started singing. And one of them turned his head 100, 200 yards away. He turned his head, and the horse you see in the film walked towards me, came right up to me, and I kept on singing. And then it got really intimate, as you'll see in the film, as you did. And he ends up giving me a kiss. Now, what are the chances? What are the chances that a wild horse will come up and listen to somebody's song and give him a kiss? I mean, that's pretty far out.
This really ties in to my last couple of guests, in fact.
Really?
I don't know where this podcast is leading, but I've had 3 in a row who are talking about the power of song. So one was about the healing power of song from the Icaros and communication with the plants and with ourselves. Then the next one was kind of similar, but she was talking about our communication with the earth and the communication of native peoples with the earth. And now you're talking about the direct communication with animals through song. It's just this podcast is unintentionally leading somewhere. Well, maybe someone's got some intention, but it's not my conscious intention.
Oh, you mentioned Icaros. Well, I've experienced many Icaros in the Amazon, and anybody who's ever experienced an Icaro, it's clear. This is not coming from local intelligence. This is something coming from a very different sector of reality. And in that connection, I would say that the power of sound, the power of our spirit in voice, words are magical. Words are actually magical devices, because our breath, what keeps us alive, is actually the communication form or the platform for sound to erupt from our bodies. So our spirit becomes sound through song and language. It's something that every being understands. So that horse, first of all, knew that I was praising him. He knew. And in Peru, the first thing a shaman will do in a ceremony is praise the mountains, praise the animal spirits. In fact, he will invite the animal spirits in by saying, if they're singing in Spanish, linda, linda, beautiful, or lindo, lindo, depending on if it's masculine or feminine. And for example, they will all want to call in the jaguar spirit, and they'll sing, right? Otorongo, lindo, lindo, otorongo, lindo, lindo. Beautiful jaguar, come. And you know, we all have egos. Who can resist when you say they're beautiful? Who can resist?
Well, not a horse. The horse can't resist.
The horse couldn't resist. And so, you know, you don't get a chance to do that in the middle of London.
No.
You don't get a chance to do that. Nobody's testing this theory. But, you know, take your shoes off, get out into a field somewhere and test it. Those who are listening, see what happens. It could be a bird. It could be a flower. It could be an insect. See what happens. And I'm pretty sure you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I'm going to try that. Next time I go for a walk in the hills, that's what I'm doing.
Sing, speak, express.
I will. And I won't care if, well, I hope that no one else is around, but if they are, they are. Maybe they'll learn something too. Yeah, I'm definitely going to try that. So you had this incredible birthday with the horses, and there were scenes of you diving into rivers, stepping naked under a cold waterfall, this connection with the water, this connection with the earth, this connection with the flowers, this connection with the animals. But you were on a mission to get to the other coastline. So you did make it in the end, didn't you?
Yeah. To give a brief synopsis of the journey, there are actually 4 really big glaciers in Iceland. If you look at the map, you'll see them going from left to right. And so I went through 2 glaciers from south to north, and then from north to south through another 2 glaciers, and round the back of one glacier, and ended up in a place called Vik, a small town on the Atlantic. So this route was helped by the Icelandic staff, because they said that's how our old people, the pioneers, used to get from the north to the south, settlements in the north to the south. It was the fastest way, but it was also the hardest way because of weather. And that area that I went through was the place where people were sent into exile. So if you got judgment by the law at that time, they would banish you to the highlands, and they would say 20 years. After that, you're free. What a legal system. So all of the outlaws.
So is that what they did to the bankers in Iceland?
I wish, well, I better not say that. I better not say anything about that. So Icelandic songs are full of praise for the outlaws, both male and female, who survived the 20 years. Can you imagine? I mean, it's a volcanic wasteland. Nothing grows there. Nothing can grow there except certain wildflowers on the surface of the moss. But when you get to Sprengisandur, which is the huge black volcanic nothingness, which is where a lot of them were banished, how are you going to eat? Sheep, okay, there are sheep. Fish, you can get fish. That's about it. Seriously. So you're going to spend 20 years in that kind of a climate, stealing sheep, getting fish, a few ferns, or I don't know what else, but I mean, you're talking serious banishment here. This is not Napoleon in Elba. This is the surface of the moon. And if you can survive that, wow, you got some chutzpah, big time. And so the legal authorities would go, you survived? Whew, good on you, man, you're free. But how many survived? So it's full of ghosts, the highlands, in that sense. The ghosts of great heroes and the ghosts of great pioneers, the ghosts of great exiles. And so the Icelandic people's very personality is based on that environment where, you know, the Icelandic people are very unique. They're very talented, very smart. And they're also extremely independent because, you know, what do I have to teach a person whose ancestors survived 1,000 years of that? I don't have anything to teach such a person, quite honestly. They've got a lot to teach me. And so Iceland was like that personality. Like I went in there, this overconfident guy, and Iceland broke me down bit by bit. And then Iceland, the spirit of Iceland, let's say, started to penetrate. And I started to learn from the environment about what it means to survive, first of all. The spirit of survival, and it was absolutely fantastic.
So you described there how, you know, what could you teach them? You could teach them nothing, you know, someone who's had to have the ingenuity and the strength to survive for generation after generation in that environment. And something else that brought to mind was you mentioned contentment. In the film, and that was a case of, you know, no one could offer you anything in that state. You were just so content, so full of everything that you need. You wanted for nothing, so no one could give you anything. How did that? How was that? Can you describe that feeling?
Profound peace. Profound peace. What we always used to say in the old days, the peace that surpasseth all human understanding, the peace that we're actually made of. That's us. That's what we are. It's not some special addition later to human consciousness. That is the foundation of human consciousness, is peace. And so from peace comes contentment. And from contentment comes sufficiency. You don't need anything. You don't want to go out and get stuff anymore. Like, what else do you need? Very, very simple. Very, very straight. And I could never have imagined that I would get peace in a place that was so wild, so changeable, so volcanic. Literally, it was a complete paradox. You'd think you'd get peace on some Pacific island where things are all, nice. Absolute opposite. In the middle of wildness is where you find peace, which is why the prophets always went into the desert in every tradition. In Japan, all of the Buddhist monks went into the mountains. They went under the waterfalls. Japan's got a long tradition of ascetic practices with waterfalls and mountain training. And you begin to understand that the old people were really smart. We've totally lost it. We have no idea what we're doing. We have no idea that health and vitality and consciousness do not depend on an easy life at all. They come from somewhere entirely different. And we rigorously avoid going there. With our shoes and our boots and our hiking gear and all of our stuff. It's like we're doing everything possible not to get connected. With the mantra, I'm going to get connected. It's insanity. Insanity is the only word for it.
Yeah. It's upside down. It's back to front.
Totally. Topsy-turvy.
Yeah. Now, when you did finish this journey, you mentioned already that you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And your journey, well, it ended at the ocean, but the film finishes in a church. So what happened there?
Well, my wife's Japanese, and we've done something rather unusual. We have reaffirmed the commitment, redone the contract 6 different times in about 6 different countries, 6 different cultures. We got remarried. We didn't get divorced, of course, but we reestablished the marriage. For example, we did one at Chichen Itza when we worked with the Mayan leader, Humbatzmen, in the 90s. We got married inside Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland when I was doing a lot of research into the Templars. We got remarried in a shrine in Japan, for example, and in Damanhur, an Italian community of magicians and alchemists on top of a pyramid. So this was the 7th time we reaffirmed our marriage vows. And to make one thing clear, although you mentioned I may be a Christian, I'm also a Zen Buddhist. I'm also very influenced by Sufism and by many other philosophies. So again, we've got to watch out for the pigeonholes. And again, one thing about general semantics is that there's a language called E prime, Alan. E prime means English prime. Have you heard of it?
I haven't, but I have now.
E prime was basically made possible by general semantics, Alfred Korzybski, I think. He said that everything we say in English is so far removed from reality because we don't know how to use the verb to be, right? So a simple example, you look at some guy on TV or you look at Donald Trump or somebody, whoever, and you say, he is an idiot, right? Well, that's not true because the verb to be implies eternal, non-changing existence, right? And there's no human way possible that a guy could be an idiot 100% of the time. What you really mean to say is that guy's behavior appears idiotic to me. That's a true statement. That's truth. But to say he is an idiot is completely untrue. So when you take that into the world of science, and I'm going to be interviewing a great scientist tomorrow, you say gravity is something, something. That's totally untrue, right? It appears to us at this time in our development as human beings that gravity operates in such and such a way. That's true. But you can't say gravity is or Americans are. And I actually write journals without the verb to be at all. It does amazing things to your consciousness. You realize that everything is subjective, that there are no objective, absolute facts except one fact. The only time you can use the verb to be accurately is to say, I am. Anybody got any doubts about that? It's 100% true, right? I am. Yeah. So E prime is the most sophisticated device, linguistically speaking, to transform people's consciousness, to help them to understand the dangers of the verb to be, and the fact that everything just appears a certain way according to your state of consciousness on a certain day at a certain time. So all that came from you saying you are a Christian. Well, I follow the teachings of the Lord. I practice Zen Buddhism. I love Rumi. I enjoy shamanic ceremonies. So where does that put the fixed idea, you are a Christian, therefore you must be A, B, C, D, E? It just blows all of that to bits, which is where it should be.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating perspective. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to look into these things, and I'm going to tune into your next show as well. Now, we are coming to the end of our hour here, and I realize we've both got to go. We've both got a meeting at 8:15. Now, one final question. If there's one thing you learned from this journey that you want to share with the audience, what would it be?
It actually comes out at the end of the film. The director, Gunnar Sigurdsson, a very erudite man who actually is a playwright in his own right. He has produced plays that have transformed Icelandic society. For example, he produced a play for young people that was shown all over Iceland and completely nipped the drug problem and the alcohol abuse problem in the bud, right? He did a play that was so powerful that every school kid went to see it, got it. Do drugs and alcohol, my brain's gonna end up looking like that. So this is a very, very special artist that can do something like that. And so he would deliberately provoke me to get real answers, not just, chatter, sound bites. And so he kept prodding me like, come on, what's really happening here? Come on. And it came out at the end that, okay, so what did this all actually end up doing for me? What was the message? And it wasn't some difficult philosophical, message for humanity or me or anything grandiose at all. It was so simple, I would never have come up with it in a million years. And it was simply, be kind. 2 words. Using the verb to be in the imperative. We can do that. Live kindly. Behave kindly to other people. And because I had spent so many days on the road, looking back on a fairly long life of 65 years, being Scottish, being Celtic, renowned for our short-tempered, uptight, judgmental, critical, pain in the butt nature, the Celtic nature, right? The one antidote, be kind. Just be conscious of being kinder, because you've been a royal pain in the ass most of your life. And that's what Iceland actually taught me. The wildest environment teaches you the kindest thing. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that I have actually been able to incorporate that, but it's stuck in my body. I came back with an Icelandic spirit, let's say, in my body that will remind me every time I'm standing on the earth. What was that we told you? Remember? Be kind. Just as you're about to get on this guy's case here. Oh, and if I remember in time, then the journey will not have been in vain.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very much, John Craig, the real rover. And what's the film called?
Why on Earth?
Why on Earth? That's coming very soon. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the whole thing. Thank you very, very much for your time and your sharing this evening.
Thank you, Alan.
Good morning, as
Good
it is
day.
to you. Take care. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.